Hey everyone listening, trying to find direction and move with intention. Welcome to Moving with Intention, a podcast by Black Sheep Coaching. We hope the episode you're about to listen to is empowering, insightful, and helpful. We hope you're moving with intention in your life and taking actions, as small as they may be, towards becoming the person you want to be and living the life you want to live. Disclaimer: this podcast may contain discussion of sensitive topics that may trigger some individuals. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health professionals or resources, and we encourage you to seek those out should you need them. Hey everyone, welcome to Moving with Intention, where today we're going to be looking at awareness and mindfulness. Now, our last episode was on escapism and the notion of using things as a mental diversion. And these things could be anything from drugs, sex, pornography, um, reading books, particular hobbies, video games, things of that nature that are used as a mechanism to distract and divert our mental attention away from some of the stresses and conflicts we have in our lives. We discussed how those things are not necessarily bad, like inherently of themselves, um, but sometimes they can be used as a distraction. And if they're relied upon too much, that can turn into avoidance. And when we avoid our conflicts, in my experience, they tend to pile up. And then we get to a point where just about everything seems to be going wrong. So when we talk about awareness and mindfulness and what that means, I think that is the opposite of escapism. It's the opposite of escaping and avoiding, and it is being more present, being more in the moment, being more aware and observant and mindful of our situations and of ourselves as well. I mean, we hear the term self-awareness as well. Now, I think this is important because awareness, I think, is one of our best tools for change. When we talk about awareness, if we want to change particular situations, we need to be aware of the pros, the cons. We need to be aware of our feelings. We need to be aware of how others feel, because all of these things are variables that play into our decision. And I think the more we're aware of and the more information we have, the better decisions we can make, the more rationally sound decisions we can make, the better judgment we can exercise. We all know that lack of awareness can be harmful. And an analogy that I'd like to put forth is just a simple one of crossing the street. If we're unaware of things like traffic signals or what the lights mean, the meaning of red versus yellow versus green, if we're not aware of the cars coming in various directions or pedestrians next to us that we might bump into, this lack of awareness can cause conflicts, from simply bumping into a person to you know being hit by a vehicle at the most extreme. So that's just an analogy, but I think the notion of awareness comes up in our everyday lives all the time. Being aware of how we feel, I think, is an extremely important tool in our toolkit. If we are aware that we are tired, we know that we should get some rest. If we are aware that the house is really messy, we know that we should probably clean up a bit. If we are aware that this big project is due at work, we know we might need to get some additional sleep so that we have the energy, so that we can deal with that area of our life in a productive and in a way that benefits us. And those are just small examples, but when we examine awareness, I think awareness applies to just about every facet of our life, from when we go to sleep to when we eat. Are we aware that we're feeling hungry? To interpersonal relationships, familiar relationships, are we aware of how our decisions are making others feel? Are we mindful of that? Are we considerate? Have we considered the various pros, cons, feelings, etc.? And it can be a lot of work in my experience. There could be a lot of gymnastics, mental gymnastics, trying to jump around. Well, how will this person feel? How do I feel about this? What are my true feelings? Um, and that can be difficult. It can be really difficult, especially if you're not used to doing that. Especially if you are a person who is used to escapism and used to avoiding conflict and used to people pleasing. I think those tendencies, by their very nature, reflect that we are unaware to some degree. Because if we are a people pleaser, we're probably a bit unaware of our feelings and the negative effects that has on us. If we are someone who avoids conflict, we are probably unaware of all the consequence that comes with avoiding conflict. Now, there's some battles we shouldn't pick and we should avoid. Sure, absolutely. I don't think anything's black and white, all or nothing. I think that can be a very harmful way to think. Now, obviously, there are things like in our beliefs and in our values that we're not willing to compromise on. Though, when it comes to thinking through situations and trying to rationalize, I feel that trying to find balance, compromise, trying to find middle grounds, that can be a very healthy way um, to resolve conflict. So, when we talk about awareness, I think this is a very pivotal skill, a very critical skill when it comes to self improvement. And I recently read an article from Psychology Today in the February 2023 edition. I don't remember the author, but you can look it up. The article was entitled "Why Therapy Works," and we'll cover it on one of the episodes of this podcast because I thought it was a very good article. But they talked about this notion of psychological flexibility, which was our ability to psychologically be able to work through things and think through things, etc. But they identified three key skills within that framework of psychological flexibility. And the first one was awareness. Because if we want to change, if we want to make changes in our life, if we want to resolve conflict, we need to be aware of underlying causes and others' feelings. And perhaps we need to be aware of our mistakes and our missteps and our faults so that if an apology is needed, we can go ahead and sincerely apologize. I think awareness, mindfulness, and understanding in my life as well has been absolutely pivotal to making changes I want to make. So let's talk about how we can increase awareness, a few skills for increasing awareness. And I feel these skills, a lot of them center around self reflection and introspection. I think to understand how we behave, how we react, how others behave, I think in order to understand why conflict arises, we need to understand whether or not we contribute to that conflict. We need to understand whether or not we don't contribute to the conflict. We need to understand whether um, both sides contribute. Because there are some conflicts where it's completely one person's fault. There are other conflicts where it's completely our fault. And there are some conflicts where both people were not in the right or both sides kind of played into that conflict. So I think being able to determine in conflict, being aware of all the different variables that go into conflict and communication styles and feelings and working on a skill of empathy, etc. I think those are all very important, but I think it starts with us. As far as I'm concerned, we can't change other people. We can't force people to change. People can change, but I think that needs to come from within. So where can we start as far as awareness goes? I think we could start with ourselves. One tool I highly recommend, and it gets talked about a lot, is journaling, is sitting down and writing out our thoughts, sitting down and just writing. And it's amazing what leaks out onto the paper in times of conflict. If you ever want to figure something out, sit down and write for a while. Just sit and write and read it back to yourself. I think this has been an extremely beneficial tool for myself, and I know that this has helped others. I know that this notion of writing things down somehow makes it more tactile, somehow makes it more real than just thinking it. And it somehow has this ability to help us unravel thoughts. Now, it might not work for everybody. As I said, things aren't always black and white, and I'm not going to say this is the key skill for increasing awareness, but it is something that I personally have found helpful. Some of my coachees have found helpful, and it is something that gets talked about in the mental health community, in the coaching community, etc. Another tool for self reflection and introspection is, I think, media and books. I think when we look at some of the shows we watch and some of our heroes growing up, um, when we look at those and we try to think about why do I feel a connection to this person? Why do I relate to this character? Or why do I relate to this book? Or why is this my favorite book? I think that can bring us a lot of reflection. Just asking, what is it about this character that I resonate with? And I'll just throw one out here. I'm a big Spider Man fan. And Spider-Man to me, when I think about how I resonate and if I'm practicing awareness and try to ask myself, like, what about Spider-Man resonates with me? And, I can go through like he lost he didn't have a father, he lost somebody extremely important to him early in his life. Um, he is generally a nice person, um, perhaps a little idealist, struggles with the notion of trying to do good, but the responsibility that comes with that. And these are things that I personally resonate with. And on the surface, I'm just like, hey, I like Spider Man. He's totally cool. But as I started to dig in deeper, I could see there are certain characteristics and personality traits that I resonate with. So, as a self awareness exercise, I'd also encourage you to pick a book you really love, or pick a show you really love, or pick a character you really love, or pick who your role models are in the world, who your inspirations are, and examine what is it about those things that you resonate and relate to. Because I think this is a mirror to our values. It's a mirror to our belief systems. It's a mirror to how we want to show up and how we want to be present. And as a little pick me up here, I want to say that these heroes and these people you look up to and these people you aspire to be like, you already show some of those traits. Maybe not to the degree that you want to, maybe you don't feel that way, but I think when we idolize these people, it's because we recognize that there's something in them that we value and that we find valuable and that we find inspiring. And oftentimes when people think about their heroes, and this is an exercise in our coaching program as well, is the notion of, hey, you already exhibit some of those values. You already exhibit some of those traits. Maybe not all of them. Maybe you're still working on yourself. Maybe you're working to be the person you want to be. But to some degree, the people you aspire to be like can show you who you are, what you value, what your belief systems are. So that's another tool for increasing self-awareness and doing some self-reflection and introspection. This could be the awareness of, what do I value? What do I value in life? What are my values? Which is a very, very important question and a difficult one at times. Another tool for self reflection, as mentioned earlier, are books. I think both fiction, nonfiction, both fantasy books and historical books and self help books. I think they all can contribute to an understanding of ourselves. I think they all can help us unravel our thoughts and answer the question, who am I and what do I want to be and what's important to me? I know there are various self-help books. I think one that I've mentioned and I'll talk about on the podcast as well at some point is I think it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, I believe. But this is a number one New York Times bestseller. And this book, reading through this book, the language in it is a bit tough love, but there's a lot in that book that made sense to me. This notion of, the fucks we have to give are limited, and we choose where we put our time and energy. We choose what to give a fuck about. And the title isn't Don't Care About Anything. The title is, pick and choose what you care about, what you choose to care about, because that can affect your well-being. If we go around caring about every little single thing, I feel that's where we can feel that pressure and feel that notion of overwhelm. I'm overwhelmed. There's so many things I care about and so many things I need to attend to, and sometimes I think we have to pick and choose and pick our battles. And but I think reading is a very, very important tool for increasing introspection. We will touch on various books throughout the podcast, and I would recommend picking some of those up. Not only that, but reading articles and um, stories and just various material from around the world and from different perspectives and from different cultures. I think it can be very important to get that notion of perspective, because I think what we'll find is over time, awareness and perspective can be linked in the fact that to be aware of other people's feelings, you have to be aware that they may have a different perspective, their upbringing, their culture, um, their personal beliefs, their viewpoints, that may shift their perspective. And we might not agree with other people's perspective, but we all have a right to have it. We all have a right to our opinion. And we all have a right to be our own human being, in my opinion. But I think those statements can increase our awareness as well, or those realizations where, we can only control ourselves. We can't control other people. We can't control how they act and what they do. But we can have the awareness to say, hey, maybe they have a different perspective. Maybe they've had things in their life, or their cultural upbringing or their belief system influences the way they see the world. Everybody's seeing the world through their own lens of experience. I think that's an important part of increasing awareness. And I think this leads into the last little piece of the episode, which is another tool for increasing awareness is practicing empathy. I think empathy is a skill. I don't necessarily know that people are innately born with empathy or being non-empathetic or unempathetic. I think over time, those cultural factors, socialization factors, political factors, etc., can make us more empathetic, less empathetic, etc. But I do feel empathy is a skill that can be practiced. I do think as we go through life and we show care for others, I do think there can be a very high level of positive reinforcement when we're empathetic to others' needs, when we're empathetic to others' feelings, when we're empathetic to others' path in life. I think that can pave a better way for us. And maybe that's my Spider-Man idealism coming up, but I really do believe that. I really do believe that empathy is such an important skill, because I think it aids in awareness and understanding. I think it aids in conflict resolution, and I think it's fulfilling. I think as a species, there's a lot that's built into us to collect, to be part of a group, to have that socialization, to have these institutions like education, institutions like healthcare. I am Canadian, so healthcare is a big deal here. And I think there's this understanding that it's important to help each other. And I think this is where empathy comes in, because without empathy, I think it can breed a selfishness. I think it can breed a self absorbed individual. And in my experience, in moments being one myself, being somebody who was not the most empathetic and being somebody who, in moments, was very self absorbed. And in other moments, I was very selfless. But I think I've learned that more often than not, empathy is the right path for me based on my beliefs. Now, I want to be clear, empathy doesn't mean agreeing with everything somebody says. Empathy doesn't mean never saying no to somebody. Empathy doesn't mean being a people pleaser or a pushover. But empathy as a tool for awareness and mindfulness, I think in moments can say, hey, maybe they're reacting this way because they're a little stressed out and they've had a really hard week, and, maybe let this particular thing go. Maybe it's time to say, I understand where you're coming from. Is there anything I could do to support you? So, to wrap up, when we talk about self improvement, self help, conflict resolution, I think awareness is absolutely key. And if the words awareness, mindfulness, empathy, perspective, if those aren't in your vocabulary, you don't feel you understand the meaning of those words, I would invite you and implore you to dig in, because I think those words are extremely important when it comes to self help, when it comes to growth, when it comes to bettering our situations, resolving conflict, bettering our life. Awareness, mindfulness, empathy, perspective, self reflection, introspection, all extremely, extremely important in my opinion. Anyways, thanks for listening. I'd like to thank you all for listening. A small reminder that you can find all our links on linktree/Black Sheep Coaching. That's linktr.ee/Black Sheep Coaching. It would also mean a lot if you could support the podcast by subscribing, liking, sharing, or becoming a patron on Patreon. I hope this episode assisted you in finding direction and moving with intention. And remember that big journeys start with small steps.